Britain's anti-terrorist policies are in trouble. British police are even now chasing 3 UK schoolgirls in Turkey, rumoured to be heading for ISIL in Syria. They're not alone. More and more Britons are travelling abroad to join terrorist groups and causes backed by terror. Some analysts blame Britain itself for these problems, thanks to relationships with states exporting the Takfiri ideology, which seems to inspire these groupings. In fact, out of around 200 countries in the world, when it comes to using violence and military force abroad, Britain rates in the top 3. History shows Britain has also killed millions of people around the world. Indeed, the United Kingdom is responsible for more recent foreign deaths than 98% of all other countries on earth, giving a credible link to the claim that this causes citizens themselves to react violently to certain issues. As a major ally of Saudi Arabia, the main exporter of ISIL ideology, the UK has also funded and armed militants in Syria across 4 years, further increasing the linkage between foreign policy and motives to join the militants in Syria. What effect does the enormous death toll associated with British military action abroad have on homegrown terrorism? What benefits does Britain get from its evident associations with countries such as Saudi Arabia? And what do the public have to say about Britain's support for militants in Syria? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. And we began with this question. As has been established, Britain rates 3rd in all the world when it comes to a willingness to apply military force and violence to achieve its foreign policy objectives. How does that make the British public feel about their country? Is what we found out.
Not very proud to be British. I actually live in Scotland, and I'd like to think that they have a slightly different policy, but as we're all grouped together, it's kind of like tough luck. You know, even though we didn't vote for it, we never want to go to war. We seem to go to war quite regularly in a variety of places for reasons which are always pretty foggy as well. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, I'm glad we've intervened in Iraq, for example, because the Iraqi people now have been free and liberated to form their own democratic government, right? And they've got rid of a brutal dictator in Saddam Hussein.
I'm happy. There's no need. We go to war too quickly, I believe.
Why do you feel that way about it?
I think we're controlled too much by America.
Well, I think with hindsight, we can say that it's completely backfired on us. I think that it's just stirred up more problems in the Middle East in particular. And I'm not anti-war as such, but I do think that it's created more problems than it's solved.
Disgusting, appalling, because they can use that money to sort out the problems here. I'm unemployed. I need jobs. I can't find a job. That's where they should be concentrating, not someone else's troubles overseas. There's no financial gain.
With the United Kingdom in the top 3 for using military violence abroad, we asked our experts for their perspective on what this means for Britain.
Well, it makes me think that Britain needs a different foreign policy. Britain's foreign policies vary from government to government, but they almost inevitably involve violence. Britain has been involved in so many wars and interventions for decades, and Britain is involved surreptitiously in wars and conflicts and has been interfering in many different countries, especially the Middle East. You can name a country, and Britain has been involved in trying to overthrow a democratically elected government, as in the case in Iran in the 50s, propping up dictators up to the present day, and involved in supporting Israel and propping up Gulf dictatorships like Saudi Arabia. So it makes me think Britain needs to radically rethink its foreign policies and to stop using violence as the first resort.
Britain had a colonialist past, a British Empire, and that colonialist past involved very aggressive military occupations, invasions, which led to the killing of many, many millions of people. But these policies were pursued not by the British people in general, but by small cliques, a ruling class of Britain, which benefited from colonizing these countries and exploiting the natural resources of these countries, as well as the labor force that they used in terms of colonizing and controlling the economies of these countries. So this is a terrible past that has to be talked about, exposed, and a lot of British people are becoming much more aware of this past and they criticize it themselves.
The European Depression Association says that British workers are the most depressed in Europe. The Office of National Statistics has also revealed that suicide rates are rising. Why is the government failing the well-being of its own citizens? We put that to the public.
You know, mental illness is on the rise right around the world, and I think it's really hit us that we've got to deal with it a bit more. I think social media and media itself has probably affected our well-being of life and the way we think and the way we respond and the way we act. And so,
because this coalition's been in power for the last 5 years, we've now seen more food banks, we've now seen more people sleeping rough, and not enough has been done to help the poor and the deprived.
I've no idea. I think the mental health funding in this country is appalling. I know I've got 2 or 3 friends that are having hard times with their children at the moment. I mean, suicidal, late teens, early 20s, and they're getting no help.
To using that huge violence against others is not that positive thing, because you have to go to the balance again. Like later on, you will face that violence will reflect to somewhere against your people as well.
These people who make the laws and make the changes, they don't have the first-hand experience. What it is like out here, okay, how hard it is to get a job or how hard it is to just manage your money.
I don't know, but the suicide figures really worry me because it's men in my age group, and I understand why. You know, you get made redundant, you've had a career, all of a sudden you're at the bottom of the pack and you've got bills and debts and everything else, and then bam, you know, you're depressed.
These literally depressing statistics suggest a catalogue of failures by the government. So what's going on? We asked our experts.
The British government, especially under the current Tory-led administration, cares far more about the interests of capital than about its workers. And overworked people in this country, I mean, it goes across the whole of Europe really, but it's especially in this country, people are very overworked, very stressed, and there needs to be more consideration for workers' rights, really. And over the last few decades, the campaigns against of Labour governments as well as Tory governments against trade unions in this country has led to a decrease in workers' power, which inevitably is going to contribute towards more depression when people are overworked, they're losing their rights, their incomes are not going up in line with inflation or they're going down, and it all adds together, so things need to change there as well.
There are system problems, social system problems in Britain, and because at times of depression, economic crises, it is ordinary people who pay the price, and they are threatened with unemployment, they are threatened with depressed wages, housing crises, poor housing conditions, low wages. All these factors contribute to social and economic pressure on families, giving rise obviously to sadness and depression sometimes, and even suicide. So really it is quite a clear picture in terms of how British profiteering, if you like, in terms of the ruling classes, when there is an economic crisis and economic depression, the people, ordinary people, pay the price rather than the banks and people who control the big establishments, oil, arms manufacturing, and so forth.
Britain has killed millions around the world and recently has been responsible for more deaths than those caused by 98% of Earth's countries. What effect does this have on the likelihood of Britain's own citizens resorting to violence in a similar way? That's what we asked the public.
Yeah, I think it's going to increase the chances of this more and more. If your voice is not getting heard and your government is acting in extremely violent ways abroad, that it's more and more likely that someone's going to take action, which is which is, I guess, it's kind of an act of desperation. If they find that there's nothing they can do and their government is going around killing people, then someone is going to boil over at some point.
No, I don't think it's particular. I don't think radicalisation is linked to an overall international policy. I think if you are susceptible to radicalisation, I think it would happen anyway. I don't think it's particularly linked to an international policy.
When people are going abroad to fight terrorism and into other countries, Britain is one of the first names that's mentioned. So of course they're always going to be associated. And if you're looking for a target, it's going to be the ones that the bigger countries will be considered to be the target, really.
I think there's definitely a link from the people who are out there kind of wanting to cause problems around the world because they see that people from their family or their religion or whatever are being affected by the Americans and the British. Now, I mean, obviously, I do not condone anybody doing anything violent in this country, but we have gleaned people from all over the world, and with those people come their issues and all those sorts of things. I can remember in the 80s when I was the bad man because we were black and we wanted equal rights, and all of a sudden we were bad.
No, but I'm horrified by that statistic.
Why does that bother you so much?
Well, I thought America was the aggressor. I didn't realise maybe we're their puppets and we do the killing. Is that what it is? I don't know.
We invited our experts to analyse what the effect of this tremendously high death toll abroad was likely to be upon citizens here in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, well, it increases it, of course. British citizens are, have been involved in conflicts around the world as part of the army, as part of Britain's intelligence services, spy agencies, which have been involved in all sorts of subversion around the world, and of course the more recent phenomena of British citizens going in and getting involved in conflicts independently around the world. All the headlines at the moment are about some few young people who go off to join ISIS or in the past Al-Qaeda and certain groups like that, but there's less attention on British citizens who go to join the Israeli army, for example, or Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. And this is another form of radicalisation which is really not explored by the media in this country. I covered a story about that very recently, which more needs to be found out about it, really, because there are many British citizens who go to join the Israeli army, and this really shouldn't be allowed. And it's not something that's even considered to be wrong, but they're involved in war crimes against Palestinians, so that should definitely be stopped.
Well, this is a complex question because how ordinary people react varies. If you're talking about people who belong to the armed forces, obviously they get ordered by the senior officers and the politicians to go and invade and kill and get killed. So that is an obvious equation when there are invasions and aggressions. Then the poor soldiers, boys and girls and men and women are sent to war theaters to kill and get killed. And sometimes this violence also seeps into society in general, increasing the levels of aggression and violence. So it's a complex equation.
Britain is a major ally of Saudi Arabia, a main exporter of the ideology which inspires ISIL and similar groups. We asked the public to speculate how Britain benefits from its alliance with that country.
We want them as an ally if we ever go to war. They're a strategic geographical country.
I'm not really sure exactly. I think that, we get a lot of oil, I guess, from them. Maybe control or have some influence over who they give their oil to or where the oil is going to. But I'm not actually that clear on the politics of how it works. I can't understand really why they allow us to have so much control over there, but yeah, I don't know.
There has to be some oil advantage for us.
I wouldn't know it personally, but regards any sort of great trade between countries is going to be beneficial to Britain, and any sort of deals between, and I think Britain produces a lot of great produce, and if anything about getting our product out to the world is a good thing.
What do you think we get back from Saudi Arabia?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't like to. I wouldn't like to make that comment.
Money, the Wahhabis, that's what they are, the Wahhabis, because they have the total control of their country. It's what they say. If they don't have a democracy, how can you have a country that doesn't have a democracy?
Not really sure. Money and maybe gas, oil, I guess. There's going to be a lot of investment from Saudi Arabia.
What are the benefits to Britain from its alliance with Saudi Arabia? Our experts gave some revealing insights.
British people don't benefit at all. In fact, they suffer from it because of the inevitable blowback of terrorist groups. But the British government and the British establishment and British ruling classes benefit from it in terms of arms contracts. Britain sells all these expensive fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, for example, and then these weapons don't really go anywhere. They can't take on groups like ISIS because their ideology is essentially the same. Saudi Arabia and ISIS, they have certain competition between them, really. But then in the end, American and British fighter jets end up going to bomb Iraq and Syria.
Well, the British politicians and ruling circles love to have good alliances with rulers like the Saudi rulers, Qatari rulers, Gulf in general, Kuwait and so on. And these links are related to two main economic factors. One is oil and gas. British oil companies are heavily involved in oil production and marketing of Saudi oil, Kuwaiti oil, and so on. And the second factor is arms trade, trading with arms. Billions of pounds worth of arms are supplied to people, to Saudi rulers, to Kuwaiti rulers, and so on, in the Gulf. So there is a strong economic factor at play in terms of supporting the Saudi royal family and Qatari royal family and so on, because of these close military, security and economic links related to oil and gas production.
Britain has been funding and arming militants in Syria for the past 4 years. Are the public here in London surprised that Britons are increasingly motivated to go and join those militants? Here's what we learned.
What I know is that we're told one thing and they do another. I think that was a classic case, it's hidden, the whole thing with Blair and Iraq. So I don't know, but no, I don't agree with, I don't understand why people are going to fight with ISIS from this country.
Well, exactly. It's rather contradictory, isn't it, that we're funding them and now we're saying that they're evil because they've turned out to be not the people that we thought.
Again, I didn't know that was actually happening, and that is a sad state of affairs, isn't it, I mean, it's similar to what happened in Afghanistan with America, it sounds. The very people they were arming end up being the ones that were their enemy in the end. So, yeah, again, I didn't know that was the case.
We've got ourselves involved with things. We back this one. This has been going on since Afghanistan back in the day, when we were secretly backing these people and those people. I think people like me, members of the public, just realise now how filthy, backhanded deals have been done by governments over years to try and keep the status quo. And we're only finding out about it now, and we're only going to find out more in the future about what's happening now. It's bad. I don't know why our governments are doing that in our name. I really don't.
Finally, we invited our experts to consider the link between Britain's backing for militants in Syria and the apparent increase in numbers of Britons motivated to join that movement.
Unfortunately, not surprised. It's a terrible phenomenon. In 2002, those of us who were in the anti-war movement were warning, this will be disaster, you won't liberate Iraq, and it will inspire terrorism which will come back to haunt the West. So unfortunately, the phenomenon of some British citizens going to join these groups will continue as long as there is some sense felt of injustice on one hand, and that people feel that they need to fight against human rights abuses of occupying imperial powers like the West on one hand, but it will also continue as long as there is this ideology which comes from Saudi Arabia. That's the fact of it, really. And on one hand, Britain claims to be fighting against this ideology, but with ISIS, but on the other hand, and is fighting it. But on the other hand, the ideology where it comes from in the first place, the wellspring in Saudi Arabia, is fully propped up from the West. So it's not going to end. I mean, part of the design of it is to increase wars in the Middle East, because if the people of the Middle East are busy fighting each other along sectarian lines, then they won't be as focused against imperial and colonial impositions in the region, such as invasions by Britain and America, and especially Israel. Once people are busy fighting each other, they're not going to be fighting Israel's colonial policies, colonial occupation. So I think that's part of the design to protect Israel.
Britain was very enthusiastic, along with the United States, of course, to arm these so-called rebel groups in Syria to affect regime change. You know, the United States for many years now has been following a policy of regime change. So they invade Iraq and install a new regime. They invade Afghanistan, install a new regime. NATO bombs Libya, destroying the Libyan state, and they hope to install a regime of their liking there. And they tried the same in Syria. In Syria, they resorted to arming various groups. The funds came from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and the logistical support came mainly through Turkey. Turkey is a member of NATO, and the United States CIA has a center in Turkey which coordinates who gets the arms and the money and so on. And Britain is also heavily involved in terms of supporting these armed groups. And some of these armed groups are now like the so-called ISIS group, are now turning against Britain. At least some of their fighters are. So the arms they sent to Syria, a lot of it, and the funds went to groups like ISIS and ISIS terrorists. And some of the members of these terrorist organizations are also turning against Britain and the United States. So they create these situations, they destroy states, there is chaos involved, destruction of society. And these sectarian terrorists like ISIS, on the whole, ultimately serve the interests of the United States and the imperialist wars of aggression in the area.
The European Depression Association says that British workers are the most depressed in Europe. Other data shows that suicide rates are still rising. Yet the British government seems unwilling or unable to do anything about this, or about other factors which create a radical reaction amongst the public. On top of this, Britain seems very willing to use military violence for its foreign policy objectives, and has even supported terrorist groups abroad. Put all that together and it adds up to a cocktail of provocations, and those are the perfect ingredients for homegrown terrorism.